Hello and welcome to the Underhive. We are back with some more How to Command the Death Guard. In this series, we're going to take a look at every aspect of the Death Guard, so whether you're looking to get more out of your army, or you're thinking of joining Nurgle's finest, then there's something here for you. In this episode, I wanted to revisit a combo that I think I was a little bit harsh on the first time round, and that was for a couple of reasons. Firstly, I was looking at it with two Contemptors. We're talking about Contemptors here. I think partly it was because I don't think I would run two, just because it feels too expensive to me. So I was already kind of looking at it from a biased approach. There's certainly nothing wrong with running two Contemptors, but it's just not the route I would go down, and I think I'll let that cloud my judgment. So I want to come back to it, to be fair, for that reason. But also, Daniel Redahassi, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, we looked at a list not too long ago, and we can look at this other list from a more recent tournament, but one of, or a couple of the infantry choices have been cut from that list to allow the inclusion of a Contemptor Dreadnought with the Volkite and the missiles. I quite like having the missiles on there, and we'll come back to why in a moment. But I think with such an infantry-heavy list like that, having something that can take out those screens before they block off the otherwise slow infantry of the Death Guard means that you can move in the directions you want to without being held up before you can get onto the unit you wanted to deal with. And for that reason alone, I think it is worthwhile having this kind of long-range threat in the Death Guard, and the Contemptor is certainly a good pick for that. So let's dive in and take a look at the Volkite Volleys Contemptor combo. So for this combo, we're going to need two units, one Tallyman with the Tollkeeper Relic, and one Contemptor Dreadnought with the double Volkite and the Cyclone Missile Rack on the back. So that's going to come in at 265 points, 195 for the Contemptor, and a further 70 for the Tallyman. It'll cost you 2 CP, one for the Relic on the Tallyman, and one for the Contemptor, because it is in and of itself a Relic. So it's fairly pricey on the CP, but 2 I think is a lot more achievable in any given list than 3 if you wanted a second Contemptor. But if you have got the room for it, as I say, it's certainly not a bad pick. It's just not the route I would go down. The Tallyman there is giving the Contemptor +1 to hit. That's the Tallyman's innate ability to a core unit. And the Relic itself is giving the shooting attacks from the core units nearby exploding 6s. So an unmodified hit roll of a 6 will give you an extra hit. So the +1 to hit isn't actually affecting that, doesn't make it unmodified 5s. So it's just allowing the Contemptor to hit on 2s. Now, one of the drawbacks previously was that when I was looking at it, the Cyclone Missile Racks on 2 Contemptors is another 50 points. That's another small squad of Poxwalkers that could be doing an objective. But I think 25 points for just one missile rack on one Contemptor that's being used here is, I think, very, very valuable. Because you're already paying for the Tallyman to be there to give the +1 to hit, you're getting to hit with those missiles on 2s, which is very, very nice. You're also then being able to get the exploding 6s on those missiles. Whilst it's only 2 shots, so you're not expecting to get exploding 6s all that often, when they come up and you get that extra missile hit, for a strength 8 weapon with 2 AP and D6 damage, an extra hit is going to have some effect on the opponent if it makes all the way through to the damage, as long as you don't roll a 1. But of course, saving those re-rolls in the shooting phase for that damage roll, if the missile does get through and rolls badly on the damage, can be a very, very valuable use of that CP. So the Contemptor there becomes a real big threat at range. There's, 40-inch range for both of those weapons comfortably, so that is the majority of the board. Now, one of my drawbacks here is that if you can shoot the opponent with those long-range weapons, they can almost certainly shoot you back. And the Contemptor, some of the cost of that unit is baked into it being -1 damage and a 5-up invul. And you do have a lot of other choices in the list that have that built in, because Disgustingly Resilient is a thing, and the 5-up invuln is present on the Demon Engines, which are otherwise a cheaper choice, though they fill a different role, be it the Bloat Drone to charge up and get in with the Flesh Mower, or the Blight Hauler with those perhaps more heavy weapons, you might say, in that they're both strength 8 for the melter and the missile, whereas the Volkite on the Contemptor is only strength 6. But as we've said there, for the Death Guard, dealing with slow, steady advance to get towards threatening units is the bread and butter. We've got the durability to make it up there with many of our units, though certainly not all. Nobody's invulnerable. The free weapons on the Plague Marines now, meaning that they have access to some higher strength options in the form of the Power Fist on the Champ and the Cleaver on one of your Plague Marines or two of your Plague Marines, meaning that if they do get into a threatening vehicle, they're going to do they're going to do far more to it than if they were just using Plague Knives before the weapons became free. So whilst, yes, Death Guard generally are very good at dealing with infantry, if you are running a lot of Plague Marines now, you don't necessarily want them to get tangled up by your opponent's infantry screen because, yes, they'll kill it, but they could also kill the unit behind if they could get into that because they've got the weapons to do so now. So having something on the board that isn't there to remove the opponent's heavy threats necessarily, but to clear those screens so that they can't hold up the rest of your army and reduce that already limited movement, I think is very potent. Now, whilst I probably wouldn't put the missiles into an infantry target, maybe Terminators, I would probably try and accidentally kill an important vehicle or monster with them. But otherwise, just having the ability to chip that damage off them will make them that bit easier to kill for whatever does try to finish them off. But those 16 Volkite shots are very good into a wide variety of infantry. Now, there's a couple of drawbacks on the Volkite as it goes, but there are also a couple of real big advantages. It's 16 shots, so it's good weight of fire to begin with, and we've got that exploding 6s because of the Talisman, and we're hitting on 2s because of the Talisman. If you've got a Lord of the Death Guard nearby, for your early turns, that's not going to be that difficult. So for the turns where it's really important to get that shooting off, you're probably going to be able to reroll ones if you've got at least one Lord of the Death Guard in the list, and you just move them past the Contemptor for the first couple of turns. And saying that, the Contemptor's fairly durable and it can shoot its heavy weapons in engagement range because of big guns never tire. So it doesn't really matter that much if your opponent does try to tag it and tie it up, because it will still have an answer at least. So getting those early reroll ones means that those first couple of volleys are going to probably be quite consistent, and you would probably expect to get most, if not all, of your 16 shots you've taken, as well as a few exploding hits. So we might go as high as 18 to 20 hits coming through the hit roll. And then if we are aiming at infantry, we're probably looking at either wounding on 3s or 2s, depending where the contagion range is on that unit, or whether we're talking about very light infantry. Something like, for example, Sisters of Battle are very strong at the moment, not only owing to being strong units, but they've got some really good secondaries. Repentia are a really common pick, and of course they're a common pick because they're good at what they do. Being able to wipe out a squad like that early on by wounding on 2s is very nice. Now, one of the downsides there is that there's no AP, but into a squad like Repentia or even something with just a 4-up save normally, the odds are going to be in your favour to wipe out a small squad or deal enough damage to a larger squad that they may be in region of morale failure. Now, whilst this isn't a plague weapon, so it's not going to score you the 2 points for 7 model kills with plague weapons, 1 point for 7 model kills consistently done is still a point per your turn. You can score Fleeing Vectors in your opponent's turn, so if they then charge you, you can strike back with Terminators, Plague Marines, whatever it might be, and reap 7 kills, hopefully, to get an additional 2 points that turn. So whilst it doesn't progress the plague aspect of Fleeing Vectors, it can certainly score you some points by targeting the right infantry squad. The lack of AP means that into Astartes factions, you come up against Marines or another Traitor Legion, it's not going to line up that well on saves, but if you can pick out the standard Marines with 3-up saves, you've still got a good weight of dice there coming through. And you would expect to get a couple of those shots through, dealing those 2 damages each. And if we're not into something that automatically reduces that damage, then of course that's enough to kill a Marine and enough to take a decent chunk out of a Terminator or something like an Obliterator. Yeah, the Obliterators are a 2 as well. So whilst you're only expecting your opponent to fail those on at 1, the weight of dice, they will roll some amount of 1s, and removing Terminators as early as turn 1 or removing Obliterators as early as turn 1 before they can get up the board and actually get in range with what they want to do can be very, very valuable to the way that the game will pan out. So I think I was a little bit harsh on the Volkite previously in that the lack of AP does kind of suck into power armor, but not every faction has those kinds of saves. And another faction that's doing very well at the moment would be Necrons. They don't have brilliant saves across all of their units, and 2 damage can be effective into some of those threats. So again, the Volkite can get the work done just through weight of fire, but there are a variety of armies out there that don't have phenomenal saves. The 2 damage is going to be effective into, the strength 6 is going to be effective into, and the mortal wounds as a sprinkling on the top. If you have got a good hit roll through there, maybe you have pushed 18 hits with your exploders, you would be realistically expecting to get 3 mortal wounds. 3 mortal wounds on a target that you can see each turn is a pretty good result. Now, one of the downsides that does need to be addressed is that if you can shoot your opponent, they can probably shoot you back with their heavy options as well. And the Contemptor isn't actually that durable. Something like a Dark Lance from Dark Eldar, whilst it is only a few shots, so you know maybe you can skirt around them if you're lucky on their failed hits. But if they are lucky and they push those hits through, they're going to be wounding you on 3s, and then they're going to be putting you on that 5-up invuln. You are more likely to take the damage than not, and it only takes a couple of those to get through on a good damage roll to wipe out the Contemptor. So it's important to be aware that you don't want to leave it stuck out like a sore thumb if your opponent has got a significant amount of shooting. But even with that said, you should still be able to draw a bead on a relevant target and plaster them with Volkite shots and the crack missiles, if nothing else. So overall, I think 1 Contemptor Dreadnought is a great addition to an army, particularly if you're going very slow and steady infantry based, because it will allow you to strike early when the rest of the army can't and get rid of something that is going to hold up your game plan later in the game. Even if you go in for more of a heavier shooting army, perhaps you've got a lot of other demon engines in the list, the bloat drone is looking to do a similar thing in terms of dealing with infantry, but I don't think there's any harm with having 2 vehicle units that can both do that sort of thing. The Plague Burst crawlers can then focus on the heavier targets and things that are out of line of sight, so I think they work well together. And the Blight Haulers, as we've said, they kind of tailor to a different role. Rather than wanting to focus the infantry and the units that can look to play the game for your opponent, the Blight Haulers will look to take out the things that your opponent is smashing your units down with, their tanks, their big ranged monsters, and of course the Blight Haulers can then act as a screen to keep your Contemptor from being tagged. So I think 1 Tallyman, 1 Contemptor works really, really well in a variety of lists. I think throwing a second one in is fine, but it feels a bit too expensive to me. And so thank you to those of you that have perhaps, commented to that effect and helped me rethink my approach for the previous video. And also congratulations to Daniel Redahassi. Again, hope I'm pronouncing that right. For a second place finish with a Contemptor Dreadnought in the list. Evidently revised his plan since the previous tournament and came out with a better result. So whether that's through better play, better understanding of his own list, a bit of extra luck, or just the Contemptor being a better pick for the list overall, I imagine it's probably a combination of all 3. But whatever factor it was that led to that, the fact is he changed the list and he got a better result out of it. So I think that's well done to him. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time in the Underhive.